Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. Welcome back, everybody, to Season 2, Episode 3 of the Near Memo. David, Mike, and Greg, we're all here to talk about search, social, commerce, the metaverse, Bitcoin, and everything else under the sun.
Speaking of Bitcoin, my wife got an email from Visa today that said something to the effect, we're going to make it easy for you to use Coinbase to buy NFTs. And she said, what the fuck is Coinbase and what are NFTs? So I spent 10 minutes explaining it to her. I think
we should turn every episode, a screenshot from every one of these episodes into an NFT and sell it, and that'll be our business model.
There you go. My wife won't buy it.
Or maybe not.
Right. I was going to say, I think, Mike, that email from Visa underscores the importance of the need to segment your subscriber lists pretty dramatically.
Know your customer.
Know your customer. Exactly.
So
Marcus spam. Okay.
So we're going to lead off this week with an item that I thought was really interesting. It got some coverage, but not a ton. Given how significant it could be, I didn't see that much coverage of it. Wrote about it on Wednesday. It's the Democrats, which spans the Senate and the House. Anna Eshoo, Cory Booker, I forget the third sponsor, Cory Booker in the Senate, Anna Eshoo in the House, introduced a bill, which I think has very little chance of making it into law, but nonetheless, it's pretty interesting, that would ban all personal data use in advertising. Essentially bans targeted advertising in a display context, the stuff that Facebook is doing. You couldn't, there are protected categories, race, gender, religion, that you explicitly can't use any data to target your ads, but it doesn't allow any personal data to be used in that context. And perhaps even more significantly in a way, it doesn't allow data to be sold for ad targeting purposes. So data brokers, there's a whole ecosystem of them, obviously, who sell data that then gets incorporated into campaigns or used to determine campaigns would not be permissible. It's a pretty radical bill, and I think just is another manifestation of the anger, frustration, desire to rein in these big tech companies, which many people think are spying on us. And there was the earlier survey that I wrote about, I think last week, from the Washington Post, where a majority, I forget the percentage, a majority of Americans believe that tech companies are, quote unquote, spying on them. So sort of the surveillance capitalism idea. Again, I don't think it probably will make it into law, but I'm surprised that the IAB didn't come out and others didn't come out decrying it and saying it's going to ruin everything if this happens, kill jobs, destroy
hurt small businesses.
Right.
Please write.
Where's the Connected Commerce Council on this one?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I can predict that.
It's the default. Ruin small businesses is the default. Harm small businesses is the default. Sort of reflexive position of these giant companies now. So, what does the world look like? I mean, interestingly, search doesn't get impacted by this, right? So, paid search would just kind of chug along unscathed in this context, but Facebook and others on the display side, certainly social media, would be, they'd have to resort to contextual advertising effectively. So it would really radically change things if it were to make it.
I mean, theoretically, the world is shifting towards contextual advertising anyway, given the changes that Apple has made and the theoretical disappearance of the third-party cookie, in a couple of years. I think that the pendulum is swinging back towards contextual and away from data already, but this would radically accelerate that and take it all the way to the line. So
I'm not sure I agree with that. I mean, I do think that contextual has sort of come back into focus, and there's more sophisticated contextual advertising. But there's universal ID. There's a lot of efforts to replace the cookie going on. I'm not sure that unless people are compelled to abandon that sort of, email being the sort of linchpin of the whole universal ID system, I'm not sure that people are going to give up audience-based, people-based targeting.
I don't think that advertisers will give that up. I think it's just going to prove to be so much less effective than it is today that contextual will eventually supersede it.
Well, I mean, it's sort of interesting in this context. PlaceIQ, which was really arguably the original company using location data to indicate other things like purchase intent or brand affinity or consumer identification, finally got its exit after many other companies in the space either merged or were acquired. And I asked Duncan McCall, who is the CEO, did Apple's privacy, opt-in privacy moves, accelerate this or trigger this? And he said no. We were always more privacy compliant than others, and it sort of flushed out the bad companies, which he didn't name, but there are a couple of them that were sort of doing sleazy things. But they're now sort of sucked into a larger private equity-backed data company. So I think all this sort of regulatory action would be congressional action is sort of accelerating some of these deals as people sort of jockey for position.
Greg, would location data in this bill, would location data be considered personal data that wouldn't be accessible?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah, you couldn't use it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, that's not entirely true. I think that they would allow. I think there's some parameters around it. They would allow location, because arguably Google couldn't use locate. I mean, you get into this question about what is, is it marketing? Is it advertising? Because there are ads in the local pack. I mean, it gets sort of murky. You could use location sort of broadly defined. You couldn't use precise location. You could use broad location. So presumably at the city level or something like that. Mm-hmm. But I don't think this is going to make it in its current form into law that would be signed. So we'll see. But there's just a lot going on legislatively. Some of this stuff will get out. We'll see what happens. But
my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, it was written in such a way to apply primarily to the biggest companies. Is that correct? Would it apply to AT&T and Verizon?
I mean, it's really designed like all these things to restrain the bigger companies from perceived abuses. I believe small businesses were explicitly exempted.
But what about AT&T and Verizon, where the abuses occur on such a regular level, but nobody talks about it?
I mean, presumably it doesn't name companies, doesn't name names in the bill. So presumably, you'd always get into a litigation scenario where, the courts would ultimately be the arbiters of the application of this, but presumably it would impact them as well, equally.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.